All right, so today we're doing something a little different. We're not exploring a place, we're exploring a mind, specifically the operating system of Bill Gates. We're going to use his own words from a really insightful interview to kind of unpack how he sees the world, what he thinks about his incredible wealth, and, what he sees as the big challenges for all of us down the road. So let's dive in.
So that quote you just saw? That was from the interviewer who sat down with him. And honestly, that's our goal here too. We're going to take what he said in that chat and just peel back the layers on how this guy, one of the most influential people on the planet, really thinks. We'll get into everything from global innovation all the way down to his own personal fears.
Okay, so where do we start this journey? Let's begin with how he sees the world. And a great place to focus is his long, and I mean long, relationship with India. He sees it as this perfect little snapshot of how the entire world is changing. And what you're seeing here, it's just a massive shift. I mean, it's night and day. Gates talks about how, back in the early Microsoft days, the game plan was simple. You find the absolute top talent in India, and you bring them over to the US. He even joked that, both countries were kind of mad at Microsoft for this whole brain drain thing. But now, the story has completely flipped. India isn't just a place you go to recruit people anymore. It's become its own powerhouse, this self-contained innovation hub that's building solutions for the entire world. And this really drives that point home. He talks about India's incredible strength in what he calls frugal solutions. And don't get him wrong, this isn't about being cheap. It's about being incredibly smart and efficient with resources to create things that can scale globally. We're talking about everything from developing life-saving vaccines to advanced agriculture, even AI for health and education. And that digital public infrastructure, that's huge. So now, India is exporting these brilliant solutions, not just its talent. It's a total game changer for the global landscape. Now, this big picture global view he has, it's all tied directly to his personal principles. And if you really want to get how he thinks about solving the world's problems, you first have to understand his philosophy on wealth. And let me tell you, it's not what you'd expect. It basically goes against everything we assume about these super, super rich. So it all comes down to this one question, right? For pretty much all of history, if you were wealthy, the answer was obvious. Of course, you build a massive fortune, you protect it, and you pass it down to your kids to create a dynasty. But Bill Gates, he has a very, very different take on that. Yeah, less than 1%. It's a staggering number, isn't it? He's been super clear about this for a long time. He truly believes that just handing his kids a giant pile of money would not be doing them any favors. In fact, he thinks it would totally distort their lives. What he wants is for them to go out and forge their own paths, to feel like their own successes really matter, Not to just be living in the shadow of his, as he puts it, incredible luck. And this is the key difference, what you're seeing on the screen right now. You've got the old way of thinking, dynastic wealth. The goal there is to hold on to that base capital, that core fortune, and pass it down through the family. But then there's this new model, which he says you see a lot in the tech world. And it's all about giving away that base capital. The whole point isn't to build a family dynasty. It's to use those resources to tackle the biggest problems on the planet and to do it while you're still around to see if it works. Okay, so if the plan is just to give all the money away, how on earth did he make so much of it in the first place? Well, that brings us right to his philosophy on work. This part is all about the mindset, that intense drive, that single-minded focus that actually built Microsoft from the ground up. Being a maniac was the right thing. I mean, wow, that's a pretty intense and revealing thing to say, right? He looks back at his 20s as this period of just obsessive focus. He said his competitors would tell him he worked too hard, and his response was just, yes, I do. For him, building Microsoft was a race, plain and simple. And to win that race, you had to have a truly maniacal level of dedication. But here's the thing, he's really quick to say that this was a strategy for a very specific time in his life. His 20s. A time when he didn't have a wife, didn't have kids. Back then, he could pull a 72-hour shift at the office just running on adrenaline. But the Bill Gates of today, he's working with a totally different toolkit. That maniacal focus on one thing has shifted to a much broader perspective on everything. And that insane stamina, well, it's evolved into a deep well of wisdom and a real knack for managing people to solve these huge, complex global problems. So when you boil it all down, his advice really comes down to these three key things. First, you have to be a student, always. And you've got to be brutally honest with yourself about what you actually know and what you don't. Second, read. A lot. You're building this mental framework so that when you learn something new, you have a place to put it, a way for it to connect to everything else. And finally, find your focus. He really emphasizes this, especially when you're young. That is your time to go all in. That's when you can afford to be that maniac.
And that same relentless focus he had on software, it's now completely shifted to solving humanity's biggest, thorniest problems. So, what's on his mind these days? What does he look at and see as the biggest threats coming our way?
Well, here it is. This is basically his list of existential risks, the stuff that genuinely keeps him up at night. At the very top, making sure AI goes in a good direction for all of us. But then you've got things like avoiding the next pandemic, which, let's be real, he was warning us about way before 2020. And then there are the big ones that are always there: nuclear war, bioterrorism, and of course, climate change. But out of all those challenges, what's the hardest one to solve? The one that money and tech can't just fix on their own. It's us. It's human behavior. He points out that trying to convince millions of people and their governments to change their habits is just incredibly hard. It doesn't matter if it's for health or climate or anything else. He's a tech guy at heart, right? He's always looking for that scientific fix. But he totally admits that this human element is the trickiest, most complex puzzle of all.
And that brings us to our last stop on this journey inside his brain. We're going to shift from these huge global issues to something deeply personal. After a whole life spent thinking about complex systems, software, and massive solutions, what does Bill Gates actually fear for himself?
You might think it's something common, like heights or public speaking or something like that. But no. His biggest fear is something way more fundamental to who he is as a person and how his mind works. And his answer is it's so simple, but so profound. His biggest fear is his brain getting less capable. Think about it. The one tool that has defined his entire life, his ability to learn, to see connections, to understand these incredibly complex systems, that's the thing he's most afraid of losing. He even says he knows he'll be sad on the day he can't just pick up a 500-page book and really dive in. It just shows you that at his core, his identity is all about being a learner. And that idea of learning, of solving things, brings us right to the end, his ultimate legacy. When someone asks him what he wants to be remembered for, he doesn't talk about Microsoft. He doesn't talk about being one of the richest people ever. He talks about a future where a disease like polio, something that terrified generations, is so completely gone that it's just a footnote in a history book. A future where a kid might hear the word polio and have to genuinely ask, what was that? It's a pretty powerful idea, and it kind of leaves us with a question for ourselves, doesn't it? If you could solve one problem so completely that future generations wouldn't even know it existed, what would it be?